This is Make It Mentionable. I'm Alyssa Patmos, and this is the show about being human in a world that encourages us to be robots. I invite you to join me as we journey through the mess, the magic, and the mania in between, because what we can talk about, we can manage. This honest conversation extravaganza includes free-flowing conversations and high doses of vulnerability to remind you that you aren't alone. No topic is off limits, and episodes are designed to leave you smarter, aka more self-aware than when you came. I am so glad you're here. Welcome back to another episode of Make It Mentionable. Today is a special episode because Geoff is here with me for the very first time. For those of you who don't know, Geoff is my boyfriend, and he's talked about all the time in the show, so I figured I should introduce him to you. So, Geoff.
Hello.
Thank you for coming on with me.
Thank you for having me.
So we thought that we would talk about conflict today because the show is called Make It Mentionable, which I'll repeat myself for what feels like the 43rd time. Mr. Rogers has a quote that anything that is human can be mentioned, and anything that can be mentioned can be managed. And yet we live in this world where it can be really freaking hard to mention things sometimes. Either it feels vulnerable, or it might not feel safe, or we just think we shouldn't because it's a topic that stays behind closed doors. And oftentimes conflict in relationships is one of those things where when people are struggling, they don't really end up sharing what's going on. And then you don't have a support system for how to get out of it. So we thought we would talk about conflict.
Of which we have a little bit from time to time.
Just a tad. Just a tad.
Just a tad.
But conflict can be a good thing. Conflict, when treated with care, can be an opportunity to bring two people closer. And you and I have talked about that before.
Absolutely. It is an opportunity, and if handled well, it does. I think it brings us closer together afterward. It's really painful during. And as we'll talk about, there's reasons why it does bring us closer together and why we feel better afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, when we started dating, like the first conflict that we had come up, I wasn't used to being allowed to be angry. Like I shut off my ability to feel that. And so when you, like one of our very first conflicts, like when you brought up, you're like, why aren't you mad?
Yeah, you were like smiling and laughing. I'm like, this is not right.
And then the very next day, like I wouldn't treat that, because then the very next day was super connecting and I felt much closer to you. So we have a definition of conflict in our relationship. I can't remember where it comes from. Do you remember where it comes from?
One of the books, I think it was actually Barry Weinhold's book. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Our definition of conflict is that conflict is an unmet need poorly expressed. And because that can take a minute to sink in, I'm going to say it one more time. So conflict is an unmet need poorly expressed. So whenever there's a conflict going on, from this definition, there's an underlying need that's not being met. And we have found this to be true time and time again in our relationship. And so it becomes a process then of figuring out how to excavate what the need is and to bring that into awareness so that it's no longer controlling you outside of your awareness.
Yes, and being able to see that in yourself at a time that you're very emotional and it's difficult, and generally you're seeing something, the other person is doing something to you, but it's really about your internal need.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like the reason we get into conflict is because we think like, oh my God, Geoff, you're doing this to me? Like, who are you? I can't believe you're saying this right now. When really he has no idea that it's about something going on for me internally, whether that's like whatever he's saying, like reminds me of something that someone has said in the past, or if it's just something that I'm sensitive to, but he has no idea about.
Yeah, and therein lies the opportunity for feeling better afterwards and connecting more, because if we can get to the root of what that unmet need is and find a way for it to be met and do that for our partner, it creates goodwill and feelings of love and connection.
Yes. Now get there.
It can be extremely difficult, especially if both parties have an unmet need. Like if it's one person and the other person's calm and cool and collected, like that can be easier. But when it's both parties having some unmet need, or my unmet need triggers something in you.
Right. Yeah, like our hardest, like if I have a conflict, if I'm triggered by something or I'm upset about something and it doesn't send him into his shit, then it's much easier to get through, because he can help me get in touch with my need, and then we can work through what that is. The hardest thing is when something that I'm going through triggers something in him, and then all of a sudden, who dips out first? Because yeah, it is usually me.
You
Yes. So creating an environment in a relationship where if both of you get in your shit, then it becomes important for one person, and it doesn't always have to be the same person. Hopefully it's not. It's not always with us. You do it sometimes, but it is mostly me. But if one person can recognize, okay, wait, like we have conflicting needs here. If one person can pop out of that and sort of start to observe the situation, it can be easier to unwind the conflict. And this shows up a lot for us. Like, do we have an example? Are we going to air an example?
Sure.
Okay. What have we got?
Well,
there's something with like criticism.
well, yeah, that's a common theme. So if you have a need around, we can maybe think of a specific example, but if you have a need, this is more general, but if you have a need.
We could talk about when we went out to dinner with your mom.
Oh, the wind and.
Or just the food, like when we got back. I got it.
Okay.
Okay. So we went out to dinner recently with Geoff's mom, and we recently went more carnivore. So we're not eating as many plants. We're eating a crap ton of meat. And we went to a restaurant that back before we had made this decision, it was delicious and we loved it. And we thought the menu was great. And we always love to share food because it's more fun, like the shared experience. We enjoy it. So we went to this restaurant and we waited forever to get a table. We're sitting outside. So I was semi-uncomfortable because I don't really like eating in wind, and it was windy that night. So that was going on under the surface. And then when we looked at the menu, from the lens of how we now eat, the menu wasn't really as fitting, which was kind of a surprise. And so whatever, we end up having a delicious meal. It was good. But when we get home, I made a comment around, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I made a comment around, if we're going to go out to eat, I think we should look at the menu beforehand. Like that wasn't really super carnivore friendly for us anymore. And I was still semi-hungry because I didn't want to order anything else. It was an expensive restaurant. I didn't want to pay more to get more food. I was like, I'll eat something at home, no big deal. But then we had a little bit of conflict ensue, because what happened for you when I said that?
I felt criticized. I felt like I messed up, didn't do something right, and you were complaining about that and doing it in a way that just sort of lobbed it over there for me and didn't come with a specific ask for, like, in my mind, like, can we do this next time?
Yeah. So what we've learned through this type of situation is you from your past. If you feel like something is just being tossed over, you feel this, and correct me wherever I'm wrong here. I'm speaking for you because we dealt with this for a year and some now. So if I say something and I'm just expressing like, hey, here's what I think, you feel, if you feel like it comes with this, like in this scenario, I feel like you felt like it came with this intense pressure where I needed you to fix something, or like you had done something wrong. Is that correct?
Yes, it's rooted in my fear and my shit around feeling like I can't get things wrong, and if I do and you're upset and I don't fix it or have a plan for how I'm going to avoid that in the future, like maybe there's disaster on the horizon.
Yeah. And so if all of a sudden he then gets kicked into feeling like there's disaster, then it's no longer each of us over here looking at said problem. It's like all of a sudden we're against each other, right? And then that's where conflict can shift a lot of times.
Right. And I have some need there that I'm not expressing that well. So, and then I'm feeling like you're doing something to me, and I accuse you. I'm like, I might get upset. Like, do you have an ask? Like, what are you throwing over? Like, and even feeling like I have to defend myself against something I did wrong,
right?
Which is my fear and something I'm working on, but it comes up, and so then I might act in a way that starts a conflict where there might not have need to be one. Like you're just sharing a feeling, sharing something that you experienced and something you want to see change, but I turn that into something else based on my past.
Yeah. So that he felt pressure to fix it and felt like I was criticizing something, and that's not where I was coming from at all. And so it ended up triggering his defense mechanisms around wanting to fix it, wanting to defend yourself, if I'm remembering correctly. And then that got me around my stuff where I'm like, wait, why are you pushing me away? Why isn't it safe for me to express this right now? Like I thought everything was fine. And so then all of a sudden I'm not feeling as safe. And then we're at the impasse. And this is the place. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to add, there was more even leading up to that, as I remember that. Like part of my reaction was experiencing you being upset at dinner about sitting outside, and then like I could tell you were upset throughout dinner,
right.
and you were not very comfortable and relaxed and all that because we had to sit outside. It was the only table we could get, and it was a little chilly, and then they took forever.
Oh my God, they took forever.
So it was like this combination of things such that throughout dinner, I'm very attuned to you, and I'm also hyper vigilant in a way that's not super healthy about, are you happy with me?
Sometimes a coping mechanism is to be hyper vigilant about how our partner is feeling. And sometimes we choose that because we feel like it's safer. If we can be super attuned to how they're feeling, we can predict what's going to happen and we can adjust before any hurt or any harm ever goes down. And so we develop that as a coping mechanism, but it doesn't mean that it always serves us.
Right. And so through dinner, like I'm noting, okay, she's upset. What did I do wrong?
In those scenarios where we're triggered, we end up taking it personally when really you didn't do anything wrong. I'm just annoyed with the wind. But I'm not putting that on you. I'm not like, oh my God, I can't believe you made me sit outside. But that's how you're thinking.
So maybe we can talk about like what my unmet need was that I was expressing poorly. Like I needed reassurance that I didn't like screw up and you're not upset at me and you're not planning to like leave me because I'm not meeting your needs. And you are just complaining or expressing dissatisfaction with the scenario, but it's okay. And it's not that I screwed up and didn't do the right thing and didn't mind read, which is what I bring into it. Like, oh, I didn't mind read properly. I didn't foresee everything that go wrong and get it all just right. And then I start beating myself up and turning into this, having this feeling come up that I can't control at the moment, that I've done something wrong and this is going to lead to things happening in the future that I desperately want to avoid.
Yeah.
If I could express that and share that and make that mentionable, and then ask for some reassurance and get it and feel comfortable that like, okay, it's cool. It's okay. Like some things went wrong and that's okay.
Right.
And it's cool. And I don't need to be freaking out in this panic way.
Right. Yeah. Because when we can ask for our unmet needs, then the information is out there and we can each respond more compassionately to that. So in that scenario, when we got home, so in that scenario, if you could have asked that at the restaurant, that would have eased your nervous system throughout the rest of dinner, which would have been great. And so I could have said something like, I mean, because you wanted reassurance that you hadn't done anything wrong, right?
Yes. And I wanted you to be in a better mood, but like I don't get to ask for that. But like and not like I think I was blaming myself. Like you're not happy. And you know,
So I could have said something more calming, like, and we can workshop this because I'm making this up off the top of my head, but something like, I don't need this to change right now. I appreciate you getting us a table. I want you to know I'm super uncomfortable, but it's okay. Like next time I would prefer we don't sit in the wind.
yes. And I know you did your best and I'm not blaming you.
Okay.
Like because that's like
Mhm.
that's the critic where I take it to criticism is, and you never said this, but like in my mind, it's like you didn't do good enough, you didn't think enough ahead, you didn't care enough for my needs, you're not meeting my needs. Like
I was thinking none of those things. None of them.
but in my mind.
But this is what happens. We go into relationships with all of this past stuff that now our current partner has to sort through with us. And the root of conflict is usually not the direct thing that's in front of us. This is a recurring pattern because this is where a lot of his pain comes from. And I have my own things too. So in that sense, if I had reassured you then when we got home and I made the comment about like, hey, let's look at the menu the next time to make sure it's in line with carnivore, it wouldn't have felt like an additional, oh my God, I did something wrong.
Right.
But I had no idea that he was feeling like I was blaming him or like he had done something wrong. And so that's the moment where vulnerability comes in, because if we just keep talking in circles around, what do you mean? I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. Like, it's really easy to take that tone where he's like, I feel like you're criticizing. And I'm like, I'm not criticizing you.
Right. And that's the word I can take it is just like, this isn't fair. You're criticizing me. You're telling me you're complaining and I did my best. Like I was trying to have us a nice dinner and I did my fucking best. Like stop criticizing me.
And then if I'm like, I truly, then I was not feeling critical. I don't think so. So if I then am experiencing that and go into the mode of, I'm not criticizing you, or, a thing that people could naturally do here is be like, calm down. There's nothing worse than telling someone how to feel when they're upset. Like, no. But these are the patterns we find ourselves in. We find ourselves when we don't try to focus on getting to the root and prioritize identifying the unmet need, we end up circling with just this dilemma that's in front of us when really that's the surface. But what we're arguing about and being influenced by is operating all under the surface.
Yeah. The point that you made that I want to hit home, like the conflict is usually not about what's happening there. Like it's almost never that. Right. It's us feeling like we did at another time when we had a lot of pain. And so it's something that feels similar to that. But the conflict isn't usually about what we think the conflict is about, and that we're trying to convince our partner that they're seeing wrong or they're doing something wrong. It's not about that. If we can step back and take a deep breath and listen, we can get to like what's really going on here for you.
Right. And one of the major things that gets in the way of that or comes up and interrupts that is fear. And it's, fear of being rejected. It's fear of being abandoned. It's fear of being seen. It's fear of not being accepted. It's fear of change. It's fear of disrupting the apple cart or fear of conflict. These core underlying human fears that come up from things when we were children get in the way of us being able to be as compassionate as we would like to be in conversations. And so when fear takes over, like a fear of rejection, like if the train of thought that you were on, like, oh, she's criticizing me, she's not happy, her needs aren't being met, which means she's going to leave me. Fear of rejection, like
It's really fear of abandonment.
Fear of abandonment. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. So fear of abandonment, if that starts creeping in, then everything you're doing in the conversation is then about protecting yourself from that fear.
Right. Which also explains like why it's such a big deal to me. Like if we can get to the point where we say like it's this subconscious fear of abandonment, losing my primary attachment figure, losing someone that I'm attached to, there's almost nothing worse. And as adults, I think we're like trying, like, oh, it's cool, it's fine. And I can convince myself like, oh, if we broke up, like I'd be fine. I'll find someone else. Like I can think that. But this is the primal fear of like a little kid losing a parent. And that is catastrophic. That is literally like, there's nothing worse. And there's nothing we won't do to protect against that. So if that's coming up for me, I'm going to fight tooth and nail. I'm going to act toxic. I'm going to demand things of you. I'm going to force major conflict because it's literally feels like life and death, which it was when we were a kid. It's not now, but it sort of explains like, why is this such a big deal? Like, get over it. Well, our body doesn't recognize it's not a big deal. It feels like it's a big deal.
Right. And it's a very practical application of inner child work. And, when I say that phrase, there are a lot of people who use it in a woo context or, just associate it with therapy. But the reality is that we all have an inner child who is trying to continue to grow up. And when we were young, it was our parents' job to help foster us growing up into productive adults. And now it's our job. It's our job to become the parent to ourselves and to work on healing our own things. And their relationships, I think, are a gateway. Like they're a fast track to doing that because they show you your shit. Like you can not be in a relationship and avoid, like you're not going to have as much conflict. It's not going to come up. You're not living with someone. You're not like having competing needs. You can do what you want. So it's not going to come up as much.
If it's not a meaningful relationship, the conflict doesn't happen. This is why with acquaintances or fun people, like we just don't have conflict.
Right.
It comes up with the important people in our lives because that's when it triggers something around our childhood fears. So it's a significant other or a family member.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to recognize because if we're looking for a relationship that's conflict free, that's not healthy. Like
that doesn't exist. Or if you have that, you don't really have a meaningful, deep relationship.
Hiding from yourself would be the question. And that doesn't mean that you have to be fighting. It's not even fighting. Like conflict with care. When you look at conflict with this definition of conflict is an unmet need, poorly expressed, it becomes a vehicle to, I think, more care and compassion in conflict. Like I don't identify with us fighting, like very rarely, because we're navigating through conflict with compassion. The fighting is what happens when you forget there's an unmet need.
Or you're so focused on your own need
defenses,
that you can't even get in touch with your partner's need.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So there are some people who aren't going to meet you halfway in how conflict like this can go down. And that might not be a situation that you want to stay in. But searching for a relationship that is completely conflict free is not the ideal. And in fact, I would argue that the best relationships are the ones where you learn that you can go through conflict, but you can come out on the other side more connected. Would you agree?
I agree 100%. And like one of my phrases, which I use all the time, is like, what if it's a gift, right?
Yeah.
And this is another way to reframe conflict. And when I'm not in it, I can view it this way, which is like, the conflict is a gift. It is pointing me to something that I need to heal, and it's presenting an opportunity to do some of that healing. And so like our conflict at the dinner and where we finally got to, like, you were able to understand me better. We're able to repair and come closer together. And that's a benefit. But I'm having a separate benefit just for me, which is I got in touch with like that inner child and this part of me that fears abandonment and is scared of that. And I was able to get in touch and do some reparenting and have more awareness around it and release some of that fear so that next time it doesn't come up so strongly. And I believe that's the case. And like since then, I don't know if we've had the similar conflict. There are themes, but I am healing that. And if we didn't have that conflict, I wouldn't have had that opportunity to do that healing and get better so that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I don't want to be having that same reaction.
Right.
Even a year from now, like I want to be slowly healing that. And conflict is an opportunity for us to face that and see what we need to work on in and of ourselves. And in that sense, it's a gift.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the hardest part is if we end up having the same fight over and over and over again, that's where people get really frustrated. I think that's where relationships fall apart because there's no growth. Like it's because you're operating at the surface. Like it's not going underneath and finding the root. And so it does keep pressing and it keeps coming up in the same way. And that's when it's exhausting.
Unresolved conflict. Yes.
Right.
And I know earlier in my life, like I was trying to avoid it. And then if you got it, like get out of it as quickly as you can and move on and like, okay, but it doesn't resolve then.
Right.
And then it just is going to reoccur. And these are the reoccurring patterns that we see with people that mean something to us. The same thing keeps coming up over and over. Something is pressing for some healing, some completion, and we can ignore it or we can face it. And we do this, and it's a lot of fucking work. Like
so much
work. But like when we have conflict, we don't avoid it. We prioritize it and we just get in on and we spend as much time as we need to do that. And sometimes it's in front of other people that we care about. But it's like we got to do this. Like this is one of our values is we're going to face it and we're going to resolve it and we're going to repair. And we're not going to avoid it because we're playing the long game.
Right. And so in that moment, we prioritize our relationship. And yeah, it might be uncomfortable for other people at times. Now, granted, we're not, there are the people who like scream at each other in front of other people. Like we're not doing that. Way.
Sometimes you scream at me.
Oh, that's because when
I don't scream. I stay off. I'm not judging that.
So it's like a civil discussion. One thing it's referring to though is that if I get scared and I feel like I'm not being heard, I will raise my voice. If it's dramatic.
I love you.
So if I feel like I'm not being heard, then I resort to, okay, like I feel like my voice has to rise. And that comes from many unhealthy arguments in the past with other people. But then my nervous system, we can either fight, we can flee, we can fight, or we can freeze, or we can fawn. And so in my nervous system, then, like if I'm not feeling understood, but I know I'm committed to not running the other direction, then sometimes my tendency when I get scared is, okay, my voice goes up some. And he's like cool as a cucumber all the time and like doesn't ever raise his voice about anything. And I just want animated in general. Like we do have to.
And we've learned that. Yeah.
And so just even recognizing that, like for him to recognize that, like, oh, wait, she's not actually screaming at me, like she's not feeling heard right now. And so she's raising the volume.
And that's a learning that I've had recently. And I registered that coming out of conflict and coming out of us talking about that, and like really coming to understand, like, okay, when you raise your voice, like, don't take it personally, and recognize what is this unmet need.
Yeah.
It's an unmet need to feel validated and heard. And so what I've said to myself, like, I got to remember, if you're raising your voice, I gotta say, like, listen to me, and repeat, and sometimes multiple repeat. Like, I say it once and it's like, of course you heard that, but you're not necessarily hearing it. So like, reinforce, I hear you. Here's what you're telling me.
It's not enough to just say, I hear you. Like the feedback of going back and actually saying what I've said so that I can hear and know that you understand is so important.
Yes.
And so these are the dynamics that unfold for every relationship. Like, I wouldn't believe you if you told me otherwise. But I don't feel like people often talk about them or air it out. And the next piece of it for me, like the next piece of conflict that I think is really, really important is repair. So, you know, conflict can lead to rupture or it can lead to us repairing. And if we're in a situation where conflict is happening routinely and we're not repairing, that's going to feel like shit. And that might not be, it's probably not indicative of a relationship that is as good for you as it could be. It doesn't mean you can't work on it, but it means there's a choice point there. And so this other piece of repair and coming back together after a conflict is, so I can't like overstate the importance of this. So how do we do that? Hugs. Hugs,
touching, hugs,
yeah.
Validation, hearing it, like genuine understanding, and like, oh, like I know how you feel, and that must be hard. So like really understanding the other person, stating that, investing time. Like, part of our repair is like, we both know we're not running from it, and we're willing to stay up late and hash it out. But in the end, yes, like conflict can feel very much like this, and like you versus me in the middle of it. But we value at the end, we want to get back to this point where we're together, we're on the same team, and even we're looking at, there's that thing that happened, like, ooh, and we're viewing it in a collaborative way.
Yes. Yeah, and then it's something that we learn from, and we usually have a plan for like addressing it together, then or how we would do it differently the next time.
That's an important part for me.
Yes,
like it's just part of how my brain works. Like, what are we doing different? Because if we're not, we're gonna end up in the same place. So okay, next time I need to try to see this in myself and not do X. Like, I need to I need to be able to see that you're not criticizing me, you're just stating a need, and not take it so personally. And maybe I need to ask you for reassurance then, and say, hey, can I have reassurance that you're not mad at me, or you're not criticizing me? Like, I hear that you're just feeling this way, but did I do something really wrong? And ask for that.
Yeah, repair for you like need that summary piece of like, how can I trust that this isn't going to happen in the same way again? What can I do differently? What do you commit to doing differently? That eases your nervous system. And I feel like what do? I feel like I end up asking for a hug a lot. I feel like I have to have you like come close, because if I feel like we've been apart and I've been like pushed away during any sort of conflict, which happens sometimes.
With you doing the pushing most of the time, but no, you do need that in the end.
To like come back together, and at some points it feels very vulnerable to ask for a hug, like even in the middle of conflict. Sometimes I have this thing where it's like a push pull, where sometimes it's like I I want him to be close, but I'm not feeling safe in the moment. And so I push away some, like even if he's trying to touch me, which can feel admittedly like total crap to him. He's like, no, I'm trying to come close to you. And I'm like semi pushing him away. And so then I have to like eat it afterwards, like in the next moment, and come back and be like, wait. Like I actually wanted you close. And if you were viewing that just as like not understanding where I'm coming from, that would feel like total crap and it'd probably be exhausting. Fortunately, we've been able to tap into and understand that that's something that happens to me because I'm not feeling safe and I desperately want you close, but it doesn't feel safe for me to have you there right now. So I like push for a second, but then I come back and ask for it. And like that's just like, fortunately you've accepted that that's a piece of where I'm at the moment. I'm working on that too, but it's where we're at. And I think that's such an important piece about conflict too, is we have to be compassionate for where our partner is in the moment. Because they're like, the point where they're going to change is not in the middle of a heavy conflict. Like that's not where you're going to see them suddenly change their behavior. No freaking way. And so for me, asking for hugs can feel really super vulnerable because in the middle of that, I've accidentally just pushed you away, but now I'm asking for a hug and I kind of feel like I'm like, yeah. So it can feel vulnerable in that moment. And at times I don't even want to have to ask for it. And I think that's where we can get into trouble too, in general, as humans, is there are things that we know we need, or at least peripherally, we semi know that we need, but it can feel so vulnerable to ask for it in the moment. Or we can feel like, why do I have to ask for this?
Yes.
And that can get us into trouble.
Yes. And there's something about taking ownership for our needs and our wants and our own well-being that we prioritize. I think we've both been with people and probably exhibited these characteristics ourselves in which we unfairly put that on our partner and say, it's your job to take care of me and my feelings. It's your job to mind read and know what I want. And I think one of the healthy things we do is we generally take ownership. Like if I need something, I got to state it. I can't assume that you're going to know it.
Right.
And if I need a hug, I gotta ask for a hug. And I can't just passively aggressively wait for it or say, right. I expect you to know that. Like maybe sometimes I want you to know it, and that's fair. But if you don't, like, okay, I gotta ask. I gotta be clear, because communication, what's clear in our mind isn't necessarily even on your mind.
Right, exactly. So for me, asking for a hug becomes really important in repair. Like I need us to come back together, like
right.
Recalibrate, and that helps reestablish connection for me. But going back to owning your needs, like there are different ways of doing that too. Like I can very directly say, I need a hug right now. Like, will you come give me one? Which I'm a fan of, because I really like the piece in there when we can own our need. I think that's calming to other people when we're able to say, hey, I need this, and then ask a question afterwards. They have a choice, and if they want to meet that need or not. And if they don't, then it's up to us to figure out how we're going to get that need met, or to negotiate. But you cannot. Other times I find myself not saying that piece, and I'm just like, will you please come give me a hug? And I think both of those helps in repair. And I do want to say, like, going back to the piece around, sometimes that can feel vulnerable to ask for, or we feel like we shouldn't have to ask for it, but that doesn't get us anywhere. That doesn't get us any closer. And so in the moment, it becomes important to own the need and ask for it. But then I do feel like it's fair game, and you can see if you agree with this, but I do feel like it's fair game then afterwards, if I were to come to you, if I noticed that I was always having to ask for a hug, I could come to you and I could say like, hey, I have more of a need for touch. Like after this, can you try to remember to touch me more? Can you try to remember that I need that connection? And I think you can have a conversation about what's needed outside of the conflict heavy piece.
And that's the best time to do it. Like right. In the conflict, it's not. It's when things are calmed, and we're feeling safe is when we can have those conversations better. But to me, that's consistent. That's another form of you asking for what you need.
Right.
And it's not a very specific, can I have a hug right now?
Right.
It's saying, can you be more mindful of this? Can you know that this is important to me and prioritize it? And basically, you're not asking me to mind read because you're being specific, but you're saying, can you think about this and build it in? And when you're asking for that, then I get a choice. I get to take that in and say, this is important to you. And I get to say, I'm not sure I can do that for these reasons, or would this work instead? Or I could say flat out, no, we tend not to do that. But I am an individual. I get to choose it. And you're giving me that choice. And when you give me that choice, and if I care about you, I'm going to tend to say, yeah, like, okay, that's important to you. I'm going to try to do that more. And I might have an ask in return. I might say, yes, I'm going to try to do that. And if I forget, will you not hold it against me? And will you specifically then ask me for it? And I put so much pressure on myself to be perfect that I need to be able to not be perfect and not mind read perfect. And this is all my shit.
These are the things that we're working with. Like, heavens, it's so difficult to be human and have all of this these mind games going on, because the reality is that this is what ends up influencing the dynamics of your connection with someone else. And it sounds, I mean, I'm not minimizing what you're saying. Like, objectively, it sounds silly. All the things that we're talking about, like the nuances of what we navigate as humans, but it's the most real thing on the planet, because his model of the world and his version of reality is completely different than my model of the world and my version of reality. And no matter how long you have been with a partner, that doesn't mean you know the ins and outs of their soul. And so expecting them to be the same as you've always known them is damaging.
Yeah, and back to what you said earlier on about, we can sometimes think that we shouldn't have this conflict. It shouldn't be this hard. It should be easy. If it's not, then something's wrong. We're not made for each other. And what I think where we've ended up, is like, yeah, that's just not true. There's so much nuance and complexity, and I have all my issues. You have your issues. We're trying to communicate. There will be conflict. So this myth of like this conflict-free relationship, it should just be smooth and easy sailing. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
There will be conflict. What I think we can say though, like, it shouldn't be repeated conflict, right? Like, it should be something new or something a little adjusted.
Yeah, something's different about it.
Yes.
It feels, we both have been in relationships where the conflict feels the same over and over and over and over again. And that's not healthy. It's not getting anywhere. It's adding stress. It's not helping. There's no repair. There's no completion of that conflictual event. So then you just end up in this cycle.
Uh-huh.
It's very disconnecting and crappy. So
well, I was just the thing that came to mind for me, like, we're talking about some pretty deep conflict and like old wounds and that kind of stuff. But sometimes it's the lighter stuff. It's like leaving the toothpaste cap off, or having a dirty sink, or leaving clothes somewhere. And that can be just as damaging.
That can
or
be
more, right? And that's the kind of thing that can go on and on and on. Like, how many fucking times I have to tell you to pick up your clothes or whatever.
Outlet that there's a signal of like some deeper need too, because it's like, why are you picking everything? Like, what is bubbling under the surface that like this is driving you so nuts? Especially like if it's something like, I've heard couples where the toothpaste has not been an issue for 4 years, and then all of a sudden the toothpaste is the issue.
Right. Because the other one's too hard to get to.
Right, but the toothpaste is not the issue.
Yeah. But sometimes it is. Sometimes it is literally like, and then it's really pretty easy once you figure it out. Like, if you own it, like, I have a need for the toothpaste bag. Are you willing to do that for me? And it's really that ask. And it's not like, you're this terrible person. Why do you keep doing that? Don't you respect me? Don't you care about hygiene? Like, it's none of that. It's like, I have a need for this. Would you mind doing it? And then the other person gets to say, Okay.
To say no.
Or they get to say no.
In which case, some more negotiation probably goes down.
Right. And the word negotiation, like, I think a lot of people feel like like that's not, it's a dirty word for partners. Like it's not, that's a business term or something like that. But no, like we have to negotiate all the time.
Yeah, because we're two people with individual needs who need to get them met.
Yeah.
And so like
It's okay
that's
to
stuff to
negotiate.
negotiate. And that is a good thing. Sometimes, sometimes it's really easy for me to bend something because it's not that important to me, versus if it's really important to him, like, okay, cool, no big deal. And then if it's really important to both of us, that's where we have to negotiate. Otherwise we just end up at an impasse, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and there might be something, and if it's really important to both people and you can't agree and you can't negotiate, those are sometimes the deal breakers, and the things that say like this isn't going to work. And those are possibilities.
To have those.
For sure.
So I think that's the other thing about conflict that can like really muddy up this situation, which is sometimes, and this drives you freaking nuts, sometimes one of the people isn't actually in touch with what their need is. And you grew up, it was easy for you to get in touch with your needs.
Yeah, I'm really good at that. I know what they are.
Roll up your tongue, like.
And I can advocate for it. Like I know what they are, and I can advocate for it. It's just like
Fault.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
There's an extreme version of that. And then for me, I historically haven't always known what I needed. And so that can be really damaging, because in that moment, the coping strategy can be not to bring up anything that's going on, because you don't really have a specific need, and like you kind of know you're upset, but you don't really know why, and then you kind of are lying to yourself, but you know you're acting off, but you're not really admitting what's going on. So it's like it can get us into this hairy spot as humans when we don't know what we need. And so I think a big piece of conflict management in relationship is allowing yourself to get in touch with your needs and knowing that it's okay to have them. And I think sometimes even that switch starts to lessen conflict, because you're communicating more powerfully before conflict even happens. Like I say the words I need or I want so much more now than I did a year ago. And so we don't have the debacle over you getting frustrated and asking me like, do you have a need? In fact, I say that to you a lot now too. And so there's one of the really powerful things about getting in touch with that is we can start to change relationship dynamics without ever even having to engage in a conversation. And that's the power of being radically honest with ourselves.
Go back to where we started, like the definition of conflict. An unmet need poorly expressed. We didn't say this because maybe it's obvious, but maybe it's not. Like, so if we're going to resolve the conflict, we have to make this unmet need mentionable. We have to get in touch with it for ourselves and for the other person, and we have to own that need and talk about it. If we're not in touch with that, if we can't get in touch with that, if we're not sure what the need is, like the conflict's still there, we know we have a need that isn't being met, and then we're acting out in some way and there's conflict. But so by definition, if we believe that definition, which we do for conflict, the way to resolve it is to get that need met. And you can't get the need met if you don't know what it is. So getting in touch with your needs, being able to understand what they are, own them, articulate them, is required for conflict resolution.
Yeah, and the benefit of that is more intimacy, but in a way that feels safe. Because I think a lot of people that, they flee from intimacy because it hasn't felt safe to engage in conflict. But when you can start making it safe to have conflict, it also becomes safer to have that deeper level of connection and that deeper level of intimacy that we so often crave, but don't always quite know how to access.
Yeah. And it can get easier. You use the term gather new evidence, and you do. Like the more conflict we have, and the more that it ends up being safe and resolved, and you do care about my needs. You do hear me. I can have that need met. The safer it is to have conflict in the future versus the model where we have some conflict. It's not safe. We don't get it resolved. That's what's going to lead to more conflict avoidance because it's like that was awful. I don't want to do that again.
Right. Right.
So the more we do it, the more we have success with it, the more we get a chance to be vulnerable and have that turn out well instead of, not well.
Right.
The more we feel safe to engage in it in the future.
Yes. I think there's one more thing that I think we should touch on. Oh my God. That comes up for us. And I think it's important with this and with gathering new evidence because the last thing I want to mention on this is that conflict does not come up at convenient times. Most often it's inconvenient. And so Geoff and I have this thing where it's a running theme where his shit comes up in the morning and my crap comes up at night. And in the morning, like we both get to work early, like his job requires him to get up and like be on the computer almost instantly. And so that can sometimes be inconvenient. And then at night, like we love sleep. We prioritize sleep over many things. And so when my stuff comes up at night, for me, it can feel really safe for some of my things that I'm processing to come up like in the dark when I'm in bed, because bed feels safe to me. It always has, under the covers, and he wants to fall asleep. And so then he can't be there for me in the way that I need him. And similarly, if we're both distracted in the morning and something has come up, then maybe we can't be there for each other in the best of ways. And so there are two lessons here, I think. I think the first is like recognizing when your partner's stuff has a tendency to come up and having compassion for that. Two, recognizing what your need is in that moment and being able to share it so that some sort of negotiation can take place. Like sometimes at night you say, hey, Alyssa, like I hear that this is really important to you. I want to be there for you. I'm having a really hard time being here for you right now because I'm really freaking tired. And then I can hear that and I can say, I can assess in myself, like, how important is this right now? Can it wait? In which case it feels good to me to be like, okay, but when can we talk about this tomorrow? Like, when can you commit to talking about it then? Or if it truly is something that it's like, no, I got to deal with this right now, then I can say, like, can you please stay up? This is really important. And then it's like, what can we do? Like, can we turn on the lights? Can we move positions? Can we get out of bed? But like, this is really important to me.
It's a mini, like the bigger conflict or need, yes, but now I have a need to go to sleep. You have a need to get this resolved. Can we agree? Can we negotiate? Sometimes we negotiate, like, can you stay up an extra half hour or, and then I get like say at some point, like, my mind is so cloudy right now. Like, I'm so tired. I can't be here for you in the way that I want to.
Which is really frustrating sometimes.
Yes, because you have a need to resolve it. I can like take a break and sleep on it and get to it tomorrow.
Even if, like, yeah, you're talking about like if we have a conflict and you want to finish it tomorrow.
Yeah,
like, no, that doesn't usually work.
Yeah, I know. It's just now we have a disconnect. Like, we don't, like, we're talking about all this stuff we do for conflicts and how we think we do it well and all that, but we have some intractable stuff that's like hard. Like, and that's one. Like, I'm ready to go to sleep, and you just need to get in this and talk for hours. And I'm
hours is a little dramatic, babe.
Sometimes.
Because
or I want space and I need, like, for me, space is good. Like, we're having a conflict. Let's take a little space, take a deep breath.
Awful. That is what feels inherently so unsafe to me.
Right. No, that scares you where it brings me peace.
Right. And so navigating those dynamics, I feel like we could do a whole other thing on, but navigating those dynamics is I think there's never a perfect answer for that. But what I do know, and I think what we know for sure, is that it goes much more smoothly if you can at least air it, if you can at least get to the point where you recognize that that's happening. Okay, I don't feel safe going to sleep right now. You need space. Where's the middle ground? What can we do? And then we can come together and solve that. I was talking more about like if I just have something that like is going on for me that I need to talk about.
Oh, right.
Which is
Yeah.
I mean, we navigate it in a similar way. So in that regard, conflict isn't always going to be convenient when it comes up. And I think accepting some of the different ways that our partners have learned to engage in conflict or have or the needs that they have around how it gets resolved. I think having a conversation about that outside of conflictual times can be really helpful in addressing conflict. Do you agree?
Yeah. Discuss when things are calm. How do we want to handle it? What's our MO? What's our process? Because when you're in the middle of it, it's really freaking hard. And if you have something you've agreed to when you're both calm and in a good state of mind, then like, okay, when this happens, here's what we're going to do. And remembering like the keep like we're having conflict. What's the unmet need?
Yeah.
Like that's, if you can just start with that.
Yeah. And so I think that's a really great place for people to start individually too. Like even if you're not in a relationship, like starting to get more in touch with the needs and what are the unmet needs or what were unmet needs in the past, because I think that can allow a lot of forgiveness and compassion for previous relationships too.
And you can sort of practice and go back and think of prior conflicts and like, what was the unmet need there? What was mine? What was that other person's? Yeah.
And then I would just want to add, like you touched on it and we joke about it. Like this is by no means do we sort through our conflict perfectly ever, because communication is messy. And that is the thing that I will continue to sing until pigs fly is it's messy. It's not easy because we're trying to translate what's in one person's head to the other person, and yet they have this whole other different world that's going on in their head that they're trying to translate back to us. And so this middle ground is like this void that requires skills that we're not often taught. And so it can be messy. And we have to allow ourselves to have it be messy. And so, yeah, we have very messy times at times that when we have to engage in conflict. But when you have the underlying value of conflict is an unmet need poorly met, I think it helps get you back to a place where it becomes easier and easier to repair.
And where else can people learn how to communicate?
So if you want to learn how to communicate better, come hang out with me. We have a community for podcast listeners. It is called the Convey Collective, and I would love to have you come hang out in there. I share more tips and trainings all about how to communicate better. And whether you're single or in a relationship, we don't just cover relationship dynamics. I go across the board with how to make sense of our world through language and how you get to more healing vibes from that. So come hang out. It's alyssapatmos.com/community. That's alyssapatmos.com/community. I will see you there. And thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening in. I'll catch you next time.
You've just finished listening to another episode of Make It Mentionable with me, your host, Alyssa Patmos. If you're looking for more in between episodes, then sign up for The Peel. It's my free newsletter that gives tips for how to navigate whatever life dishes. And it's also the place where I share the juiciest of stories. To check it out, head on over to alyssapatmos.com/The Peel. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.